Global Partnership Program that is run in Uzbekistan in close collaboration with the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education of the Republic of Uzbekistan. And today I see many participants that we have worked with. I see rectors and pro-rectors of universities. I see members of national education reform project teams. So welcome everyone. And I also see researchers and scholarship candidates representing the network of El-Yurt Umide Foundation. And I see some representatives of international organizations. So very, very warm welcome to all of you. So we are ready to open our discussion, and I'm delighted to introduce new British Council Uzbekistan Country Director, Denise Waddingham, to say a few words. Over to you, Denise.
Thank you, Jamilia. It's very good to be here. Welcome to everybody. As some of you know, I've been in post in Uzbekistan for about 7 weeks now, so I'm quite new. And I'm really delighted to have joined when the British Council is celebrating our 25th anniversary. So 25 years of this kind of collaboration in Uzbekistan, which we're very proud about. Our programs respond to the national education reforms in Uzbekistan. And I have to say that I'm really impressed with the scale of reform and the ambition for education in this country. I had the pleasure of meeting with First Deputy Minister Karimov around a month ago, I think. And we talked about the progress that's been made over the past few years in moving higher education enrollments, I think from 9% to 30%, and doubling the number of universities in Uzbekistan. And also about the ambition to get some of these institutions into the world's top 1,000 ranked universities. So today's discussion on effective governance is so important to all of this. Our Going Global Partnership Programme aims to strengthen partnership with leading higher education institutions and quality assurance agencies to support system-to-system and institutional development collaboration between leading education partners and higher education institutions in Uzbekistan and in the UK. At a policy level, the programme focuses on knowledge sharing in the areas of education. You could mute yourself, thank you. So our programme focuses on knowledge sharing in the areas of education reform policies and quality assurance in higher education. And it supports partnership with the UK higher education sector. And this includes engagement in international debate, dedicated consultancies for the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialised Education, and national quality inspection around quality assurance, higher education governance, academic and financial autonomies of universities, and credit transfer systems. So building on our previous policy discussions, exploring the conditions for good higher education governance, this webinar will take a deeper dive today into these aspects and how they support institutional autonomy. We will focus on what good governance means in practice for institutions and those working within them in relation to governing effectively. I'm delighted that our Going Global Partnership Programme is delivered in Uzbekistan in partnership with Advance HE, and that the session today will be run by Victoria Holbrook, Assistant Director Governance, and by Professor Sian Waring, Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Northampton. So welcome to you. Thank you. Back to Jamilia.
Thank you very much, Denise. And as we said, we run this program in Uzbekistan in close collaboration with the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education. And actually the theme of today's webinar was refined in several conversations with the First Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Kamiljon Karimov. So over to you, Kamiljon Hamidovich. Can you say a few words just to explain the context
yes.
and priorities for our discussion?
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you very much, Jamila. Assalamu alaikum, hurmatli webinar ishtirokchilari. Good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues. And I wish to start also with formal words of welcome to Denise, whom I met already in the ministry, but I think this is the first time Denise attends the formal meeting. So I have this pleasure on behalf of the ministry to welcome Denise to the new position of the Director of British Council, the office in Uzbekistan, and the country director for British Council. And as she just mentioned, we had a good conversation with her where we have discussed, the previous the partnership with British Council, but also the way forward and our priorities in working together. And I wish to thank, of course, British Council. I wish to thank Advance HE and other colleagues who joined us this afternoon for organizing this event. And actually, as it was already mentioned, we have come out together with British Council and Advance HE, come out with this particular topic for today's webinar, because the higher education and in particular university governance, an extremely important the topic for us, very timely topic, because we are now moving to a greater the transparency, the greater accountability and greater autonomy of our higher education institutions, and therefore international experience, including the British experience in governing, in managing the universities and overall higher education system is extremely important for us. And I'm very glad that we have now close to 150 participants from different universities of Uzbekistan. So this number itself actually this showcase of the great interest of our universities in this particular issue and topic. And my colleagues already have mentioned that our universities, they're moving towards the great autonomy, and we do expect a new government, the document, executive document, which will in fact give the legal, which will provide the legal framework for our higher education institutions towards this great autonomy. And of course, the universities across the world, including in UK, they went through this difficult but important process. And I'm particularly glad that we have representatives from UK universities. In particular, I wish to thank Shan Waring from Northampton University, who will also give their own perspective in terms of effective governance of universities. But we also will hear from Advance HE, and in particular, the Victoria Holbrook, who I also wish to thank. Advance HE has a great experience in consulting, in providing advice to universities across the world on many issues, including the issues of governance. And therefore, I believe this particular webinar will be of great interest and great importance for our audience today. And I hope there will be a very lively discussion, lots of feedback from our colleagues from universities. And at the end of my brief speech, I wish once again to thank our colleagues, all colleagues from British Council, Advance HE, universities, and all others who joined us. And I wish you to have very fruitful discussion. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Kamil John, for explaining the priorities for education system in Uzbekistan. And of course, we really need to have an engaging conversation today just to understand what it is that we can learn from national and international experience that can be useful in implementing reforms. And just to say that this webinar we are running on the eve or prior to Education World Forum that will run in January 2022 in London, and will address the question of how together we can build better, stronger, bolder education that supports economic development of our countries. So, and I'm sure our discussions today will then feed into global discussions. And I'm pleased to say that Uzbekistan delegation is planning to take part in this important forum of ministers of education from all over the world. So now we are moving on to the main part of our discussion today. And over to you, Victoria and Sean.
Thank you so much, colleagues. It's really wonderful to be here. And thank you for those wonderful introductions and setting the context. That was really helpful to hear. Thank you for all being here today. We are going to talk about university governance, but we're also going to talk about the important relationship between university governance, executive leadership, and the management of change. So my name's Victoria Holbrook. I'm responsible for higher education sector governance at Advance HE, and I'm joined by Professor Sian Waring, who is Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Northampton in England. And our session today is intended to help you think about the role of governance and ways of leading change and innovation as autonomous universities. And this draws on our experiences both at sector and individual institution levels. At Advance HE, we work with many universities across the areas of governance and leadership, learning and teaching, and equality, diversity and inclusion. It's a very challenging time for higher education in the UK, and universities are autonomous from government, yet they're also regulated, and they're getting used to a new regulatory regime. So they are free to determine their characters, their missions, their purpose, and their values, and this helps them differentiate themselves from others in a competitive landscape. But they also have to meet clear regulatory standards to deliver high quality outcomes for students. And it's important to note that the standards that the government sets in England through its regulator, which is called the Office for Students, it does not dictate how a university should meet their standards. While it sets the standards, it expects universities to meet them in the best way they think they should, given their contexts, and to be able to give a clear rationale to the regulator to explain that approach. This is a very important part of English university autonomy and governance, and it's important background for what we will share with you today in this session. It's a balance of government setting clear expectations in the interests of students, yet allowing universities the scope to determine their own strategies, their own ways of working, and exercising accountability for their own decisions and outcomes. The effective governance of a university has a vital role to play here. All universities in England adopt a voluntary code of governance, which was established by the Committee of University Chairs. That code sets out very clearly that it's the role of a university's governing body to determine the character, the mission, and the purpose of the university, and to ensure that it operates in keeping with its values, as well as secure its sustainability. It's then the job of the executive and their staff to ensure that the university delivers on this, which is why effective leadership is so important. The relationship then between the governing body and the executive is vital and should be based on transparency, honesty, mutual trust and respect, yet also unafraid of healthy challenge and debate to ensure that the university is delivering the best outcomes for its students, staff, and wider society. When we look at governance effectiveness at Advance HE, we're looking for three main areas when we look at universities. That is about the culture and relationships in the boardroom and the way in which people are able to have conversations that truly are open and healthy. We're looking at the way in which processes, such as how papers get to the board, how different committees and delegations of authority are used. We want to know that those are used properly. And we also want to know, how is the board able to communicate the impact of the university? How is it able to show the progress and the transformation that the university is making and its impact on the wider world? So those three areas around boardroom culture, boardroom processes, and impact all add up to making sure that you have vital, effective governance. In England, the differentiation and indeed competitive advantage of higher education institutions is determined by the strategy that they choose to take and the values that they use to underpin their approach. So what sort of university are we, or do we want to be, is a vital question. But we must be clear that determining a strategy is not an easy job, nor is it the one that the university governing body should or can do alone. If a strategy is to lead to change, it must be widely adopted and understood and lived and breathed. I'm now going to hand over to Sian to share her experiences of navigating the governance and leadership of change as an autonomous institution. Thank you, Sian.
Thank you, Victoria. And thank you, everybody, for your welcome and your kind introductions. I'll start my slides. I'm delighted to be with you today. I will be addressing the topic on the slide of mission, strategy, and change. I'm going to give you two case studies from two universities, one that I work in at the moment and one that I worked in recently. I do want to say, I know I have much to learn from you as well. So although I'm going to be talking now, and Victoria and I'll be very happy to answer all your questions at the end and are looking forward to doing that. I'm conscious that we have as much to learn from you as you may learn from this presentation today. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me, my history, so you understand where I'm coming from in this discussion. As you can see, I am a professor. I'm a professor of teaching in higher education. I'm Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Northampton, which is one of my case studies I'll talk to you about. My name is Welsh. I come from Wales rather than England. You may have seen the name written and spelt Sian with an I, and it translates into many languages. I'm sure you've got a version of it. In English, it's Jane. My first degree was from the University of Oxford in English language and literature. And then I went to Scotland, to Strathclyde. Strathclyde is in the city of Glasgow, which will have been on the news all over the world recently for the COP26 summit. And then when I got my first job, full-time job, I moved to London, back in England, and I took a postgraduate diploma from the Institute of Education, which is now part of the University College London in London. So I tell you this because I've got quite a variety. My education comes from universities with very different missions. Over my career, I have worked at 8 different universities, and I have a very long association which has benefited me greatly with Advance HE. I am a National Teaching Fellow, thanks to that scheme, which is run by Advance HE. And I believe you are familiar in Uzbekistan with the Change Academy. And I undertook Change Academy in the year 2009 and also benefited from that. So my next slide shows pictures of the 3 universities that I studied in. The first one is the Bridge of Sighs, Hertford College in Oxford. So as you can see, ancient architecture, a very beautiful city, and has a global reputation. To the bottom right, you can see a photograph of the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, which is a modern university. It's famous for engineering and science. It's a much more recent university than Oxford. It's in Scotland rather than England. And it's got a very vocational and science base. And in the top right-hand corner, there's a picture of the Institute of Education, where I studied in London. Dates back, I believe, to the 19th century, although as you can see, this building is a 1960s building, and it specializes in education and sociology. So 3 very different universities in different locations, dating from different times, with different missions. So that's some of my background. And now I'm going to speak a little bit about my career. So I have worked mainly in modern universities, and they have strong teaching and employability missions. That means they are less focused on research, and there's less income from research than Oxford University, for example. And we're very focused on students, often who are the first in their family to enter higher education. They have no tradition of higher education. So their parents probably were not working in professional jobs that required degrees. And they are making a big move in terms of social mobility into professional careers, which will give them and their families economic protection over the course of their lives, as well as job satisfaction, mobility, and protection from change in their industries. I've been on 5 university boards. I was an elected staff member in 2 universities that I worked in. And then later in my career, I was on university boards as part of my job. And I'm also the chair of a charity. The chair of a board of a charity. It works with universities, ensuring that students who do not have supportive family backgrounds have homes while they're at universities. These students may be care leavers, or they may be estranged from their families. So I have a variety of perspectives on board level governance, which will inform my discussion with you today. So my first example is from a university that I worked in between the years of 2015 and 2019. So I worked for 4.5 years at London South Bank University. And I found this map of London. London South Bank University is located at the Elephant and Castle, which is the pink elephant you can see where the arrow points on my screen. As you can see, it's just south of the River Thames. The River Thames winds through London. And you can immediately see from that, as I'm sure you know or can imagine, London is full of transport links. It's a massive centre of approximately 8 million people. It has many job opportunities in it. It also has quite a high level of crime, as you would expect in a large city, including the threat, a heightened threat compared to the rest of the United Kingdom of terrorism. So some of the things the university had to think about was protecting ourselves from the risk of crime and terrorism, which I simply say because it's very different from some of the other universities that I've worked in. So I'm using this as an example because London South Bank University has undertaken a huge amount of change in slightly less than a decade, 8 or 9 years, since the new Vice-Chancellor joined it, Professor Dave Phoenix, who was my boss, as I said, for nearly 5 years. He came in with a mission to modernise the university, and as such, he prepared from the moment that he started to make radical change, and I was part of much of that change. So I'm going to be reporting on it from the inside. He started by reshaping the management structure. It would be fair to say that he perceived the university as relatively resistant to change, but requiring change to modernize. And as such, he made a lot of staff changes, including a lot of redundancies from the start of his leadership. And one of the things he did was change from 5 faculties to 8 schools. And that meant that he could take a layer of leadership away from the university and make it more receptive to change. He also decentralized professional services, or he led on a decentralization of professional services, which meant that rather than each faculty having support staff based within the faculty who reported to the dean, the support staff reported into central leadership, which reported directly to the executive team. The fact that they were schools rather than faculties meant there was weaker leadership at a subject level in the university, making it easier for top-level management, executive leadership to drive change through the university. So this was all part of Professor Dave Phoenix's vision, I think, to drive change at a much greater pace than had previously been possible, and to reduce resistance to that change from the outset. I'm going to skip forward a slide and then skip back again. So what you can see there is the very impressive London skyline, which I absolutely love. So out of the windows of some of the university buildings, this would be one of the views that you would see of the London skyline and the City of London as financial centre. One of the changes that was made over the last 5 years is that the university became a group structure. So you can see at the top of that list is the university, London South Bank University. Numbers 2, 3, and 4 on that list are not universities, but they became part of the university group. Lambeth College is a further education college. So it provides post-education to post-16-year-olds, mostly vocational and business education, not at a university level. Part of our government direction over the last few years, or longer than that probably, has been to focus on the 50% of young people who do not get a university education. So it's to increase education and training for the whole population, not just the 50% who come into higher education approximately. And that includes areas like apprenticeships and qualifications below degree level. So Lambeth College, as a partner, and in fact part of the university structure, allows the university to extend its reach. We say vertically and horizontally. So vertically means that students are coming in younger, from 16, and they are taking qualifications below the level of degree. And horizontally, people might start with a vocational qualification that becomes academic, or vice versa. They might start with an academic qualification that becomes vocational. So it's a concept of education which is much more inclusive and allows people to enter it from different qualifications with different goals, but change. So it increases social mobility. It's fundamentally a structure to increase social mobility. In addition to Lambeth College, part of the university group is 2 schools, London South Bank University Academy and London and South Bank University Technical College. So this means that our reach goes to children from the age of 11, and we support them and support their transition and ambitions into ultimately, hopefully, higher education. So therefore, we're doing more to catch young people from a very early age, to set their ambitions, to support them in reaching their full potential and taking a place in society where they can maximize their contribution to society, their career, their professional education, their social mobility, and their stability. The final item on that list, Southbank University Enterprises, is a business arm of the university. So universities are set up as charities. They have charitable status, which enables us financially in some respects, but it also puts limits on how we operate. So Southbank University Enterprises is more commercial. It can employ staff on different terms and conditions from the university. It can sack people, basically, on different terms and conditions from the university. It can incentivize people differently with bonuses. And it allows us to operate in parallel, if you like, with the university. So again, it maximizes the way the university can operate. And it enables some partnerships the university wouldn't otherwise be able to have. So that's a very different business model from what was in place previously for the university. One of the things that I am proudest about of my time at London Southbank University is we were twice awarded the status of University of the Year for graduate employment by a newspaper group, The Times and Sunday Times. So they produce league tables, they review university performances based on metrics, and London Southbank University was given this award twice, 2 years in a row during my time there. And I was the person responsible for this area. But I cannot take too much credit for it, partly because it was a big team effort, many people contributed, but also, as you can imagine, the road to employability for a student covers many years, probably a 5-year period. So although I know I made a contribution, the contribution predated me. It was the work that people were doing well before I arrived that meant that our students were going into graduate level employment. But for me, this is an absolute marker of social mobility. It means that students who came in often from poor backgrounds, whose families did not have a history in higher education. We have a high number of people who are refugees, as you can imagine, in London, or are the children of refugees, and people who are really turning their lives around by coming to university and leaving with qualifications that allowed them to enter graduate level employment. So this was, as I said, something I was enormously proud of. Universities in London have an advantage when it comes to the job market. There are many areas in the United Kingdom where there are not so many jobs and not so many graduate level jobs in particular. So I would not underestimate the benefit of being in London for this result. But equally, there are around 60 universities in London. So many universities have the advantage of this market, and the fact that London Southbank did so well in relation to other universities is something I'm very proud of. So just to go back to the previous slide. So I've talked a little, I've talked about reshaping the management structure and working with schools and colleges. We had international partners, the main one of whom was the British University in Egypt. So we had a strong relationship with the British University in Egypt, which meant that we were both supporting a university outside the UK and supporting students outside the UK. It also allows a different income stream. So one of the things that universities have been doing in the United Kingdom over many years is trying to diversify their income streams, both to grow, but also to protect ourselves from fluctuations in income from other sources. So some things that we control and some things that we don't control, but having more income streams gives us stability for planning. So the international partnership is a contribution to that. And then the other change that I wanted to talk to you about is one that I led from the start, which was reshaping student services from before the student is admitted to university to after they have graduated. I realized that we had quite inefficient systems. they used more staff than they needed to because we weren't making use of artificial intelligence and digital. The staff were doing unskilled jobs, which wasn't excellent for the staff either. They were doing jobs that could easily have been done by computers, and in fact should have been done by computers for speed and accuracy and service for the students. But in order to create that change, we had to completely review the culture of professional services, student services, to make it more student focused and customer focused. We had to redesign processes to make better use of computers and digital. We had to reshape teams because the teams were built on the assumption that there were staff, as I said, doing very unskilled jobs, really inputting data and moving data around. So it was a very big change process. We implemented 2 major new technological systems, a student record system and a customer relations management system. And we had to design those 2 systems to hold all the data about our students, to allow for very, very fast artificial intelligence responses and decision-making to points on that student journey that could be automated, allowing the staff to do more skilled jobs, to interact with students, and to monitor where the system wasn't working very well and improve it. So that was a big 5-year project that I started, and it's, although I've moved on, it's reaching completion now. And it is anticipated that it will save the university in the area of student services about 30% of the staffing. I know that sounds brutal. It was not expected that staff were lost through compulsory redundancies. Over that 5-year process, it was expected that the reduction of 30% was achieved through natural turnover, staff retiring or seeking jobs elsewhere. So the contraction would be achieved without making people redundant. Right. But it would allow, as you can see, for a big cost saving in that area, and that money can then be invested in other parts of the university. So that is my description of London South Bank University and my case study. I'm now going to speak about my current university, the University of Northampton, and give you a contrasting case study. And this is to allow you to see a different strategy, a different way of a university making itself distinctive, but obviously within the same regulatory framework. And I want to explain about some of the choices that we made to be competitive. And then when I've done that, I will speak about the relationship with the board. So the county of Northamptonshire is in central England. It's 1 hour north of London by train. And as you can see, that's England as part of the United Kingdom, with Scotland to the north of it, just out of view, and Wales, where I come from, to the left-hand side of your picture, and Northamptonshire in the centre. The University of Northampton was based in a teacher training college originally, and it's a very modern university. It only gained university status in about 2005. The buildings were quite old and needed a lot of renovation. And rather than renovate them, the university decided to build a brand new campus on a brownfield site. So what you can see there is a map of the campus. This campus was entirely built from scratch on what had been waste ground, and it was opened in 2018. And that's the River Nen that's curving through the campus. It's an extremely beautiful, in my view, campus, and a very modern campus. And because it was built from scratch, it's environmentally very low impact and sustainable. It's made a big step forward towards being carbon neutral in the way that it uses energy, that it's very efficient in terms of temperature control. And some of the decisions about the ways we work were also taken from a sustainability perspective. So the learning spaces are designed to be modern and encourage students to be active in their learning and social in their learning, to work together. And it's digitally, it had a digital infrastructure built in to help students work with IT and digital, and for that to inform our learning and teaching. Teaching rooms have got integrated learning technology. You can see the screen, the large screen to the right-hand side of the picture. And students learn in the classroom using digital technology, on campus, but out of the classroom together using digital technology, and off campus as well. And that was a help during the recent pandemic because we were able to move to online learning and teaching relatively smoothly. And this may be one of the things you find interesting. I don't know what would be normal practice for many of you, but in the United Kingdom, this shift to open plan working was really quite a culture change for staff, academic staff and professional service staff working open plan offices with hot desking. So I don't have a desk or an office. I bring my work in, anything that I need to carry, I bring it in the morning and I take it away in the evening, and I work at one of these desks with my laptop plugged in, as you can see. I work in different parts of the university on different days, so I can work with different teams, so I move about. I really enjoy it. Not everybody enjoys it, but I really enjoy this way of working with colleagues and seeing different teams, being accessible, and it's a very efficient use of space. It means that you don't have empty offices or empty desks, and we don't have individual printers or waste bins, so there's a big environmental saving. Now, as a university, the University of Northampton is very vocationally and professionally focused. We have many of our courses have a professional accreditation in health, education, policing, law, engineering. And this is one example of dedicated health facilities. You can see it's an ambulance, and students are taught health, that they do their health education here and learn to cope with emergencies, health emergencies, through using these specialist facilities. Like many United Kingdom universities, we're under a lot of pressure to recruit students. The value of a student fee, excuse me, the value of student fees has fallen over recent years. So to cover our basic costs, we need to increase the numbers of students we recruit. The best way for a university like Northampton to do that is by recruiting more students in our health courses. And this is because we believe that the government will retain the fee for health courses as it stands at the moment, or increase it, but we don't believe they will decrease it because of the need for health professionals. It's a very strong area of employment. Our health services are currently, they are struggling to recruit enough staff by many thousands. So if a student comes in to study a health course and completes it successfully, they are guaranteed a job, and they are relatively well-paying jobs, secure jobs. They're very hard-working jobs, obviously, very demanding, but they are secure, professionally secure jobs. So if we want to increase the number of students, one of the best ways we can do it is to increase our health education. However, you can see this is a large space. It's got expensive facilities in it. So a challenge for us is how we, if I'm just going to go back to the open plan space you saw at the beginning, this space. We have many teaching spaces that look like this, that allow students to move around, and there isn't room for dedicated facilities in them and specialist equipment. So one of our strategic goals at the moment is to increase the number of students as much as we can over the next 3 years, and that will allow us to build new space and put specialist health facilities in it, like this ambulance. So that growth will guarantee us a core of income, because of our conviction that health students will be a strong core of our future income, and that will protect other areas of activity and other income streams. I can see a hand is up. Would you like to, can I take a question now? I can take it at the end or now.
Perhaps you'd like to continue, Sian, and we'll take questions at the end. And we've had quite a few come in through the chat as well.
Okay, Victoria, thank you. So I'm going to speak a little bit about then the strategy of the University of Northampton, why it matters that we're distinctive. So as I've said, universities are competing for students. This is our core income. It accounts for about 85% of our total income by the time you include student fees, government grants, and the money that students spend at the university on accommodation and catering. So 85% of our income. It's very important to us. We do have other income streams, partnerships, enterprise, and continuing professional development activities and research. But the main income is student fees and the money that students spend on accommodation. Being distinctive for us is partly to recruit students and staff, but it's also to fulfill our mission. And as I've talked about throughout this talk, mission is partly based on place. It's very different in Northampton from London. It's partly based on student demographics. And I've spoken a little bit about the students at London South Bank University who often came from poorer backgrounds, sometimes refugees or the children of refugees. Similarly at Northampton, many students, they'll be the first in their family to go into higher education. Approximately half of them are Black or come from minority ethnic backgrounds. And many of them are traveling, commuting students, traveling either down from the north or straight up from the south. We tend to recruit on a corridor that we link to the motorway. We call it the M1 corridor. So many of them are commuting rather than living on campus. And that's because many of them are older students, so they already have families. And so they're balancing family life with studies. And the other aspect which is distinctive is the disciplines. And I mentioned my first degrees being in an institution that was focused on engineering, an institution that was focused on sociology and education. The discipline mix is different in the different institutions. So those aspects, place, student demographics and disciplines, and also traditionally how much research income is generated and how much income flows into the university from research. All of these things are part of the individual mission of the university, its size and shape, what it's known for, its reputation. So what we're trying to do is strengthen things that align with that mission, that help us to be known for the things we want to be known for, that create a brand that allows us to attract students and staff who care about these things or can see that this is a university that's going to help them achieve the things that they want to achieve. As Victoria mentioned right at the beginning of the talk, we have many things in common with other universities as well. We are regulated by the same regulators. Many of our courses, I mentioned education, law, business, health, have got professional, statutory and regulatory bodies that make sure that we are producing professionals who meet the required standards for safety, that they don't have criminal backgrounds, that they haven't cheated while at university, for example. I have sat on many disciplinary bodies where a student has been accused of plagiarism, and the way they respond to that accusation may mean that they cannot be a nurse subsequently because the Nursing and Midwifery Council requires good character before people can receive accreditation to go into nursing. So while being accused of plagiarism doesn't necessarily prevent someone practicing as a nurse, being accused of plagiarism and lying about it does prevent that. So it's the lying afterwards, which means that a person would not get accreditation for nursing because of all the dangers of giving the wrong treatment to patients and being entrusted with drugs, and the importance of honesty and integrity. So we are in a regulatory framework which applies to particular disciplines and to all universities. So I'm going to finish now by my last statement is all of these things that we're undertaking are in terms of the changes I've described at University of Northampton and London South Bank University are to enable us to respond effectively to changes in the economy, changing student demographics, our regulatory frameworks to both maintain our financial security as a university and our obligations to our staff and students and to thrive, and indeed our obligations to our local environment. So the University of Northampton is the only university in Northamptonshire. So we are a source of social and cultural benefit and financial benefit to the whole county. And that's in great contrast to my previous university in London. As I said, 60 universities in London. And so we are balancing these things in order to be distinctive and to have a future which is important for our staff, our students, and for the social environment in which we are based. So thank you. That concludes my remarks. I hope there was something in there which was of interest and use to you. I'm very happy to take questions now, as I know Victoria is. Thank you. Oh, no, sorry, one more slide. Excuse me. I will speak to this briefly because it goes to the governance issue. I'm so sorry. So in each of those cases, the Vice-Chancellor at appointment agreed a direction with the chair of the board. That was a vision for the university, and then the Vice-Chancellor and the chair of the board worked to bring the executive and the board with them. This is not the only way of doing it. It may even be not a usual way of doing it, that single individuals had a vision which was then cascaded to the wider group of the executive and the board. I think in many cases, I would expect the strategy to be built with the executive and the board from the bottom up. But in this case, both cases, these were top-down strategies that started with individuals, the Vice-Chancellor and the chair of the board. In terms of how the changes were enacted, the executive team led on the changes and they were supported and advised by their boards. But in each case, staff changed through the process. In London South Bank, the executive team changed almost completely. So when I joined the university, I went to a team meeting and we lined up in order related to the length of time we'd been in the university. And there were 20 people present. 18 people had been at the university for less than 2 years, and 2 people had been longer serving. But you could see that there was a huge change in staffing of the leadership through this period. That's different at the University of Northampton, where I've come in and I'm a new person, but the rest of the team has been quite stable. The board has changed, however, at University of Northampton. And the reason for that is many boards have been primarily older, made up of older people, white people, and they often have more men than women. So the board at University of Northampton was similar to this, and we've put a great deal of effort into diversifying the board, recruiting younger board members who have just a different perspective and bring different skills, to make sure that we've got more ethnic diversity and more people of colour on the board, and to make sure there's a gender balance, men and women. And we also look to make sure that the skills are relevant for what we need now, and that traditionally on boards, a lot of people have had estates and capital expenditure and finance experience. And what we're trying to do now is to recruit more people, perhaps with legal or HR experience, as well as digital and IT. These changes were difficult to bring about. I must say that there will have been pain for some people, new ways of working, some people lost their jobs. Overall, I believe they have both brought benefits to both universities, to the students and to the local economies. And both universities are now distinctive, mission-led, and they have a clear means to respond to policy changes and financial challenges. And I'm just going to go to the next slide and check, but I think that really does conclude my remarks for today. Yes. Victoria.
Thank you so much, Sian. That was really helpful to hear the range of examples that you put forward there. We've had quite a lot of questions come through already. I'd like to start by taking some questions that are really come back to some of the first principles around what it means to have an effective board, and perhaps I'll share a few of my reflections from the work that we do at Advance HE, and we'll touch on some of your experiences as well, Sian. But certainly we've had some questions about what do the structures of boards look like, and what are their roles in terms of holding good governance at the heart of a university. So I'll say a few words about that. From our perspective, all university boards are different, and I think that's an important thing. It needs to be the right board for your university. And usually the board is comprised, particularly in England, of around 20 members. Some have fewer people, some have more, but the mean is about 20 members on the board. And usually about 3/4 of these are drawn from outside of the university. They are people who are sought to become board members of the university by virtue of their skills and experience and different perspective, and what that can bring to helping the board do its work. Usually they're appointed through an open and transparent recruitment process, and some universities use external executive search firms to help them do that. So usually these are well-qualified, experienced people from across the world, and they can be experienced in business, in law, in finance, in digital. We're seeing a real growth in people being appointed because of their understanding of the digital market, or, for example, environmental and social justice. So lots of reasons why having a good skills mix on the board is really important to align with your strategy. In terms of board structure, there is normally, as I said, about 3/4 of the board will be independent members, plus your chair of the board. Usually there will be some staff members. There may be normally around 2 elected, usually staff members on the board. And then there may also be student members, and they're usually also elected and appointed for the duration of their term of office, usually related to their student union. In terms of how the board functions, there's usually 4 primary committees that do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of looking at what is effective in the university. So to supplement the main board of governance, you would usually have an audit committee, and audit committee's purpose is to carry out checks and assessment of whether the university is really doing the things that it says it does. It can do this through commissioning either internal audit of different activities within the university, a little bit of a sense check, taking the temperature around different parts of the university, or it might engage external consultants to help them in that work. But audit committees are a really important feature in terms of providing a space where people can get to grips with whether a university really is delivering on the things that it needs to. There will usually be a finance committee that will do what you think it will do. It will scrutinise the finances of the university and make sure that there is financial sustainability. It might also be engaged in really important work around estates development, which Sian has touched on. There will also be a remuneration committee, and this will be about evaluating the performance of senior staff at the university, particularly the Vice-Chancellor, and setting their levels of pay. And it's really important that this is done transparently and fairly, and universities have to set out within their financial statements how senior staff pay has been determined. And then a critical element for universities is the academic board and the academic governance arrangements. So every board of governors will also have an academic board or a senate, which works in parallel to it. It is constituted in the main by academics from within the university, and it has a responsibility to provide assurance to the board of governors that academic standards and quality are maintained. And then the board of governors has to test that assurance and be persuaded and confident in it, because it is responsible for assuring the regulator that those standards are indeed met. The role of the board is a really interesting question, and we've had a couple of questions that touch on that. And I would characterise it in several different ways. But the role of the board ultimately is to hold the conscience of the university. It's to understand what its purpose is and to hold the executive to account for delivering on that mission and purpose. So that means a number of things. It means ensuring financial sustainability. It means providing the accountability and assurance to government or the regulators. It means determining with the executive the strategy and the mission of the university. And we've heard from Sian a little bit about that. But I wondered, Sian, whether you had any reflections from your work, your first-hand work, really, as a senior executive member of universities, on how you would characterise the role of the board.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. And thank you very much for that really insightful, I think, description of how boards work. I'm not sure I've got anything to add to the structure, but as you were speaking, I was reflecting on my experience as chair of the board of the charity, which I mentioned. And we put a lot of effort on that board to making sure that we had a greater variety of skills and demographics. And I'll speak a little bit about that because we actually worked with executive search agents or headhunters to diversify our board. So, as I mentioned, the charity provides homes for students at university who don't necessarily have family homes. So we provide accommodation that lasts for the whole of the 3 years. And if students don't have anywhere to go in the holidays or at the end of their degree, we make sure that they're not sleeping on sofas or worse. And they've got somewhere to put their things right through their period that they're at university. So one of the things we did was make sure that we have some governors, trustees who have lived experience. So they are themselves either care leavers or they were estranged from their families. And we had to go out and we had to use headhunters to get that. So we wanted them to match the experience of the people that we were serving. We also wanted to make sure, in our case, we were a very female board. We wanted to make sure there were men on it. And we were a very white board, and we wanted to make sure that we had, as I mentioned, students at Northampton, approximately half of them are students of colour, and we wanted to make sure that the board of this charity reflected that. So that was one of the areas that we really designed the board. We also had to make sure, as you've mentioned about the skills, we were lacking legal and governance skills. And in our case, we were lacking marketing and communication skills. So we really tried to build a board that was in what you were saying about being the conscience of the charity. We thought it was very important in this case to have people who could be the conscience of the foundation, the charitable foundation, by having the experience of the students, but also that they were diverse and they had a range of skills that were going to allow the charity to thrive.
Mm. I can absolutely recognise that. We've had a fantastic question, Sian, which I think leads on from this, which is around what do you think are the key leadership skills that are required to govern universities today?
Yeah, I think it's really challenging. But one of the things I observe is the importance of the board understanding governance rather than wanting to be the executive. So I think it is. a lot of what Victoria's already said, but very much about auditing, checking that what's being told them by the executive is what's happening. I think supporting the executive, asking challenging questions, co-constructing as well, but recognizing that they're bringing a set of skills that the executive may not have, but also that the executive have skills that the board doesn't have. And avoiding, I think, getting pulled into too much detail, except from an auditing perspective. You know, obviously detail may be important to check that what they're being told is happening on the ground, but that is not the place for the board to be. The board needs to be, are people working with the right culture? Are the outcomes right? They're looking at very high level reporting and metrics. And I think it's making sure that the reports are coming through in the way they expect, that they're reflecting the change they would expect to see. One of the challenges, I think, is I mentioned university league tables, and London South Bank University had done well, but the league tables can be quite volatile, and some of the metrics are proxies for performance. And so one of the difficulties for the board is knowing that it's getting the information it really needs to have, and probably not being too dependent on information which impacts on reputation in university league tables, but isn't really about what the university is doing now. And I mentioned as well the lag on metrics like employability. So if you want to improve employability, that's a 5-year journey, and your metrics, there'll be a 5-year lag. So if you react to what you can see as a graduate outcome, you're not really helping the university make the change that it needs to make to improve graduate employability, which should be milestones much closer to the point that they can make a difference here. And I also think being aware of culture and what you've said about mission, Victoria, but making sure that leadership is not achieving its outcomes by bullying is a strong word, and it's not I've probably not picked the right word there, but making sure that change is being developed with people and that staff are able to fulfill their potential as well as just being told what to do. And I think under pressure of change, if we imagine there's a continuum with absolutely telling people what to do and forcing them at one end and building a solution with them here, I think when change is urgent, we often say you go more to this end of it, but it's not the place where staff mostly fulfill their potential over their careers. So your leadership needs to be moving on that range between telling people what to do, instructing people, and supporting them being autonomous as individuals within a strategic framework. And as a board, I would want to know that my executive leadership team were working in the right way along that continuum. And if there's a financial emergency, that they're more at the directive end. But if there's some stability, that they're supporting staff to achieve their own professional potential by setting up a culture where I think staff understand the strategic direction, but are making their own professional choices within that strategic direction.
Have you got any examples, Sian, and perhaps reflecting on what you've touched on today at London South Bank and Northampton, where or how teams have gone about really ensuring that there is that shared vision with staff for how the strategy needs to be implemented and change needs to be delivered? Because that's the really difficult bit, isn't it? It's really creating that shared vision to implement change.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a mic that's not on mute somewhere in the audience. Thank you. Thank you. So I mentioned both universities that I use case studies for, I think, were unusual in that I believe the Vice-Chancellor came in with a very clear strategic focus, which was agreed at their appointment by the board. And I think that is unusual. But I can give some examples of building strategy from grassroots up. So I know at Royal Holloway, when they were developing, this is a college of the University of London, when they were developing a new strategy, they started with a whole series of external speakers coming in to speak to staff about the environment of higher education. And that was both to inform staff of the context and why a strategy was needed, but it was also meant to be disruptive of the current culture. It was bringing different viewpoints in. It was meant to destabilize what might have been groupthink internally and allow people to see opportunities. So it was a first step, and in change management speak, you call it unfreezing. It was intended to destabilize the things people thought they knew and introduce new ideas. And then they went through a so-called green paper stage, where initial strategic ideas were brought together and it was put out for consultation, and the whole of the staff body could see it and could feed in. And then gradually it moved to a white paper stage for approval, where different options were narrowed down and a very clear strategic direction was set. But staff had been able to see how it was a very transparent process of arriving at that. I think it was a really good example of consultation, because sometimes people say consultation, they think, all viewpoints have equal weight and people get to negotiate what the outcome is. And I like this example because that was not the case. Anybody could make an argument, but the arguments were considered on merit and the strongest arguments formed the strategy. But it was a transparent process of seeing what ideas made it into the strategy and what were discarded. It wasn't a compromise, and every idea did not make it into the final strategy, but all staff had a chance to see the process and contribute to the process. And the final strategy was very, very clear, and that is actually quite different from where the college was, and it's to position itself for thriving in the future.
And I guess what's really important there as well is the role of the board in understanding and enabling that approach to take shape. So certainly I'm a governor of a university, and during our strategy development process, one of the key questions that the board has been asking the executive is, how are you engaging staff in this process? How do you know that these assumptions that you are making about the future are well-founded? What will this look and feel like for staff? And how are students going to benefit from the changes that you want to bring about? I think, again, bringing it back to the relationship with the Board of Governors, there's a real role there for governors to ask those searching questions of the executive, and to have the assurance about how well that piece of development, co-creation and consultation is actually happening, and to input themselves, of course, with their ideas from beyond higher education, which is really important.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Victoria, how students benefit, and of course, a very important stakeholder are students. So we work with the students' unions. I don't know if there's a parallel university of parallel organisations in Uzbekistan, but there's a legal act of parliament to create student unions in the United Kingdom. So universities will have a union of students which will have paid employees, but also elected student officers. So we use the student union to consult and to work with. They deliver services for the university, but they are also members of the Board of Governors. So boards of governors will probably have 2 student members who are contributing to decisions at a board level.
That's right, absolutely. Look, we've had some questions, Sian. I wanted to just move on a little bit, that are around how universities determine how to diversify their income streams. So we've talked about the challenging landscape for particularly English higher education, and that whilst we have some of the highest student fees in the world, in real terms, the contribution that fee makes to the sustainability of UK higher education has really devalued over recent years. So could you tell us a bit about what sort of choices universities are making around where to secure extra financial sustainability?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. That's such a hot topic. So I mentioned that our student fee income, along with accommodation income generated by students, is around 85%. So one of the ways we can diversify are Up until recently in the United Kingdom, student numbers were capped for home students. So there was a controlled market, but the international market was uncapped. So a lot of universities expanded internationally. I know there were some questions in the chat about partnerships, but that was one of the ways that some universities increased their finances. There are benefits, but also some risks with that. So some partnerships are easier to manage than others. Some partnerships are more expensive because they have higher risk and therefore they need more safeguards around them. We know that some universities set up campuses internationally, and those didn't always deliver financially in the way that was anticipated. So that one of the challenges with those alternative income streams is whether they will actually generate the financial benefits that are anticipated, or whether they will be a net drain on university resources. MOOCs would be an example of that, where there was a great deal of interest in massive open online courses from about 2012, with an expectation that it would fundamentally change the higher education landscape, because anybody could study anywhere for free up until the point at which they took assessment and got accreditation with really any university in the world. But that hasn't really materialized. And one of the things we can see is it's much harder to make money out of online courses than might be anticipated, given the size of the potential market. So in terms of calculating those different income streams, there's a balance of how much will it cost to break into a new market, how much will it cost to put in place an infrastructure to deliver that stream of income, what's the competition like, and how do we secure risk around it. And so for us at the University of Northampton, one of the ways we want to diversify is more through continuing professional development in areas where we've already got provision, because it reduces some of those risks, the marketing costs, the need for an additional infrastructure. We are looking at micro-credentials, which is an area of interest at the moment, I think, across a lot of providers, producing much smaller units of study, with small amounts of credit, often taught online. We are not expecting to make income from these micro-credentials. We expect to use them to attract students, which will contribute to our 85%. We're expecting to use them to support partners as part of our CPD offer. And we expect to use them to support students at the university in developing their employability and study skills. So in each case, they will support an important part of our strategy, but they will not be income generating on their own. And the reason for that is the unit cost of attracting a student and giving them accreditation compared to the fee they will pay for that smaller unit of study makes it actually quite hard to generate a substantial income from them. We do have some enterprise income. So I mentioned enterprise earlier on. We run nurse accreditation, where people who've trained to be nurses in other countries enter the UK to live and work, but they need their professional qualification re-accrediting in the UK, and that would be an example of enterprise income, which is it's about 5%. It generates about 5 million a year, pounds sterling. For the university, which is about 2 or 3% of our overall turnover. So we have some income streams that are quite substantial. But as I said, there's I think the important thing is what you said earlier about being driven by strategy and mission in terms of that diversification.
I think what strikes me about the things you've described there, Sian, again, is the role of the board in really understanding the different risks and opportunities and how all of those interlink, because it's an important part of the board's role really to have an understanding of the risk appetite of the university in line with its strategy. How far does it want to go in different areas? What's tolerable and what isn't? And some of the work that we've seen the best boards do during the pandemic is where they've taken quite a sophisticated understanding of risk in terms of what might happen if several things compound and happen at once, rather than singularly, and what happens if you were to exploit an opportunity alongside your strategy. And I think what you've described there is around understanding, particularly with your example around micro-credentials, how far you want to go in an area that is inherently aligned to your strategy, but also has some risk around in terms of it's not generating income, but it's actually delivering on other aspects of the university's mission. Getting that in balance and understood by the board is really important.
Just to give another example on that, Victoria, was reducing the cost base. So the project that I mentioned at London South Bank University, where we reduced the cost of professional services in the university by increasing use of artificial intelligence, that was a board approved project because it had capital expenditure on the two major IT systems. So the board was involved in understanding the risks of not undertaking the project, of undertaking the project, the potential savings, and the modelling of the financial benefits was presented to the board, who then approved the investment over a 5-year period on the basis that the project would pay for itself and then would deliver a surplus in years after its completion.
Thank you, Sian. We've had lots of questions. I wanted to just touch on some that were about more the learning and teaching strategy and some of the choices that you've made there. We've had some questions which are about how you have determined to make your undergraduate and postgraduate programs more competitive and attractive in the market. So what are some of the things you've thought about, which is around navigating competition and also marketing strategy?
Yeah. So one of the things I've done in my current job is a complete portfolio review of the courses that we offer. So we were offering an increasing number of different courses in an attempt to attract smaller and smaller markets, but to kind of identify different niche markets. And that included what we called combined honours, which is where students could pick any two courses and study them together. And one of my jobs was to rationalise that, because what we were finding was that we would have very small numbers of students studying a programme. It wasn't cost effective, it wasn't efficient, and it was very hard to market. So my job in reviewing the portfolio was to make it much more focused on the mission, much more distinctive, and make it possible to run it much more efficiently. So we are identifying areas of strengths and areas of strengths that correspond to growing markets, student interest, really, student demand, and then reducing our offer in areas where either student demand is shrinking or our ability to capture the market is shrinking. And for that, we used the UK has an organisation called the UCAS, University and College Admission System, which is a national organisation that students submit their 18-year-olds, their qualifications go to, and then they can apply to different universities through this UCAS system. UCAS has a lot of data, therefore, about what students choose, and we pay them a consultancy fee to get their data, and we use that data to construct a Boston matrix of growing areas and shrinking areas, and the extent to which our provision is growing or shrinking in relation to the national market. So trends, we're looking at national trends and our trends. And therefore we are focusing on expanding courses in areas that we know there's growing student demand. And if we have shrinking courses in areas of shrinking demand, we're trying to redesign them so that they become more attractive. And a lot of that is very, very simply about student data, what course titles they look for. So we've just changed computing to computer science, which may seem a small change to those of us who are not seeking a degree in computing or computer science, but we know it's much more aligned to what students search for. And we've looked at a number of titles and changed those. We're also looking at modular content to make sure that it's a range of kind of core content and interesting, exciting content. We are trying to make sure that the so-called shop window is nice and clear, and it reflects the university's mission, so that students are not coming to the university website or fairs where we promote the university and seeing courses that aren't aligned with our mission. So that there's a kind of clarity about it. Students will come knowing what we're good at. We're also developing flagships. So flagships are areas where we know we've got excellent research, excellent enterprise, and excellent education. We hope all our education is excellent, but we can't afford to have excellent enterprise and research in all areas because we cannot invest equally. So we're picking areas to really promote, to tell the story of what the university is. And it's still work in progress, but the 3 areas we're looking at are crime and justice and policing and public safety. So we've got an area around that. Sustainability, which I've already mentioned, that's an area of academic interest and the campus, and we've got research in it, and the circular economy and waste disposal and design for sustainability. And the third area is provisionally called Living Well, which is everything to do with health and sport and exercise, and psychological well-being as well. So we think under those umbrellas, we can tell a story about what we're good at and show that we've got international research excellence in it, as well as distinctive educational provision. So it's all part of raising the profile of the university and telling a story about our strengths.
And one thing that strikes me as relating to that is the power of values, actually. So I'm a governor of what is quite a small university in a rural part of England. And one of our distinctive features is that we attract lots of students who might be from the surrounding area, which is an area where it isn't the norm for students to go to university. Lots of them are first in family to go to university. The local employment market is not one of high graduate salaries. It's mostly public services. And by that, we mean health or teaching or the police or other forms of public service. And something that's really important for us to talk about as we market and determine what our distinctive offer is, particularly around nurturing that community. So we have a small but leafy campus. It's a very much a community place where people feel safe. They explore their learning, they explore their sense of selves, they build confidence, and they want to contribute to the wider world. And I think for us, part of our message and marketing strategy is certainly around, if you're part of our community as a university, we will support you, nurture you, and build your confidence so that you can go on and have real impact in the world. And I think that being a really strong golden thread for us about our values and who we are and how we deliver our learning and teaching, very highly personalized, small group teaching, is a really big deal for us. I think all of those things combine, don't they, to really help you get across what your message is. We've had some questions that build on that a little bit, and I wondered if you would touch on how a university might commercialise innovation and how that's been organised by the university. And you talked about the interesting London South Bank University example, but I think in this picture of universities needing to find their feet and do more in different ways, what would be your reflections on successful commercialisation?
Yeah, so I think it's quite common to set up a separate sub-company of the university to allow commercialisation. As I mentioned, London South Bank had done that. I think it's really useful to see it as an output of both staff work and student work. So one of the areas I think is very interesting is to have student work with the commercialised student work, such as clinics, law clinics or health clinics, and also incubators where students can start their own businesses and support students through that process of starting a business and then scaling up the business. There will be lots of activity that can be commercialised, including probably the use of the estate, and activities on campus, if the campus isn't in use full-time for teaching, that it can be deployed for other purposes and hired out and rented out, and rooms can be rented out as well in periods of time that students aren't using accommodation, and conference activity. So I think there's a wide range of activities that could fall into that, and a lot through partnerships as well, I think, and working with partners in the same country and internationally to provide services such as, I don't know, media, television, web development. So enterprise is something that I think it's really important, has strong leadership within the university, does relate to the local region and what's needed locally and globally, and therefore it's driving, or it's attracting money and growth into the local region as well as to the university. So it becomes an important civic strategy as well as just a university strategy.
That's right. And also, I think there's lots of opportunities for students within that, isn't there? So lots of universities have been exploring, as part of their commercial strategy, aligned to that of employability. What does this mean for there to be growth in graduate jobs or term time, part-time jobs that help support students to keep themselves afloat during study? So there's actually some real there's a real relationship between those things. And I wondered if you'd say a bit more about your approach to employability, Sian.
So definitely. So I mentioned how successful London South Bank have been at employability. So one aspect of that cuts across commercialisation and student employability is that students. Sorry, I think there's another mic on somewhere. I've got interference. I don't know if it was a mic. Is it gone now? So employing students to work at the university is one really good way of support students. I think it's really good for the university actually to have students working alongside staff. Often students have got a really wide range of skills, particularly if you've got mature students who they've worked already. So a ready source of employment labour for the university that benefits students because they're working for a safe and reliable employer, and it increases their skills. So I think that's a real win-win. Other things that we did at London South Bank were we put a lot of emphasis on industrial and professional experience through placements, but also visits to employers and employers contributing to the curriculum and assessment, and internships, where students, when they'd completed their studies, were supported to have a supportive and on some level of pay, but just a stipend, so low paid, but industrial activity or professional activity. And finally, we would offer follow-up qualifications as well, such as project management. So qualifications that we knew would really augment the student's ability to find employment would be offered as short-term qualifications if the student didn't already hadn't found a job, and the same at Northampton. And what that did would be, it would really accelerate students' ability to get their first job. The other thing we looked at was a kind of total employability package for students coming in. So when they get their transcript on leaving, which would cover their academic achievements, they'd have a higher education achievement record, which would cover voluntary and other activities if they'd worked in the student union, or they'd won sporting achievements. They represented the university competing against other universities. That would all be logged. And we'd make sure that they had an academic reference as well. So they had a complete digital package of academic achievement, voluntary and extracurricular achievement, and their reference, so that they knew that when they were going out into the world, it was all in one place, and they could give their story to their employer, and hopefully get a good employment outcome as a result of that.
Thanks, Sian. That's a fantastic example. I'm conscious of time, and I'd also like to offer the opportunity for people to ask their own question if there are any more remaining. And I think we just had a hand up from Azamat, I think. If you would like to ask a question, please do feel free.
Thanks so much. Azamat, I'm I would say non-traditional student in Uzbekistan. So thank you for putting this together and very interesting and informative talk. My question is about, of course, related to university governance, and I would like to maybe give some insights about the people or the university rules regarding the requirements of doing a PhD in a university. For example, in many parts of the world, it is something standard where in order to get into a PhD program, a student is required to have a master's degree, or after the undergrad, a student needs to have a master's degree. But in the United States, normally it is not a requirement. So you can get into a PhD even if you don't have a master's program. And in many parts of the world, it is actually a requirement. And I can see that lately in the United Kingdom, I saw some PhD advertisements where they do not really require a master's program. So if you're a good undergrad, you get your student with good undergraduate credentials, then you're good to go. So can you please give some more insights into this, whether universities should require or not, or whether they should give freedom to the departments?
Thank you, Azamat. Yeah, you're right. There's been quite a lot of change around this, actually. I'll let Shan share her take.
Yeah, well, I think the critical thing is that when we admit a student for a PhD, we are as sure as we can be that they've got the ability to complete it successfully. So a master's is often taken as a proxy for that, but it doesn't have to be the only way that we judge that. But what we would expect is that a student demonstrates they've got the academic skills in order to complete successfully. And so I would say that was the bottom line. So I wouldn't necessarily say it always has to be a master's degree, but a master's degree does mean that a student has studied to a certain level and has a certain set of skills. And the overwhelming responsibility of the university, I think, is not to take students who we do not have a reasonable belief can complete successfully. And I think, as Victoria said, there was a big cleanup in the UK when there were a lot of students taking a very, very long time to complete their degrees, their PhDs, and that area has all been regulated now in order to make sure that people are progressing at a good speed and they have an adequate level of supervision. But part of that is that entry, that we make sure that at entry we are only admitting students who have a reasonable chance of success. And for that reason, as well as the upgrade process, so students register usually for an MPhil, so a master's degree, and then they have to go through a transition which proves that not only have they completed the learning and achievements for an MPhil, but they are well placed to complete the PhD, so then they get the upgrade. But if they don't get the upgrade, then they do leave with a qualification, which seems to me like a very good way of doing it, because it gives the student support, it gives you some guarantees, and it means that the student has a reasonable chance of definitely leaving with a qualification rather than spending fees and spending some of their time, quite a big bit of their life really, studying for a PhD and potentially leaving with no qualification, which is something we all want to avoid.
And I think what's interesting there is it's a great example of how universities have had to be really accountable and autonomous in their decision making. So the rules are not prescribed too much from government or the regulator, but the expectation has been set that universities will test and can be confident that students, once they're admitted, have a reasonable chance of success. So that is why you will see that in the UK, some PhDs are quite traditional in that it is masters, then on to PhD as a sort of traditional progression. But in other, particularly for professional doctorates, then it may be that you are admitted on the basis of your prior experience or knowledge that you can demonstrate. And ultimately, it's for the university to be accountable for that. And they have to submit data in terms of how many students complete over what period. So actually completion rates data for universities becomes quite important. And if there were problems shown up through that data about unreasonable levels of non-completion, then that would ask questions of the university. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was helpful.
No problem. Would anyone else like to ask a question? I think we've had a really full discussion this morning, and I hope we've covered as many of your questions in the chat as we possibly could. Thank you so much for engaging with us, but I think I will hand back to Jamilia for any closing remarks or any final questions that she wishes to pose us.
Thank you very much. This has been really, really useful discussion, and I'm really grateful to all participants for excellent questions, and of course to both of our panel speakers, Sean and Victoria, for very, very useful input and clarifications. I think we covered a number of aspects to do with university governance and how you really make universities relevant, sustainable, distinctive, diverse, and inclusive. So lots of essential features of a modern university that we, I think, have unpacked. I think one of the things to follow up, we will, of course, do a summary of core messages from this discussion. We will also share the slides and the recording of this session today. And also, we are going to discuss these questions with Uzbek universities involved in the Change Academy with Advance HE, just to look at what it is that universities can do in collaboration with international partners, with the UK agencies or universities, in order to bring about positive change. And as you have heard from the First Deputy Minister of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education in Uzbekistan, large-scale reforms are taking place in education sector in Uzbekistan, and universities are moving towards academic and financial autonomy, and they're talking about credit transfer scheme and university rankings and about transnational education. All this, of course, requires a lot of thinking, but then a lot of work to shape a vision, to shape strategies, but then very importantly, how you make all of it happen, because that's the most complex, but also most exciting thing. So thank you everyone for this very, very useful session. And I'm sure we will see each other online or hopefully face-to-face very soon. So thank you very much, Advance HE, Victoria, Sean, and also thank you very much all the participants of today's discussion. And thanks to our excellent partner, Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education. I think this discussion will contribute to policy dialogue that is going on in order to make education system sustainable and responsive to the needs of the students. So thank you very much, dear all, and have a nice afternoon or evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.